When Sarah and Mark first welcomed Zoe into their home, they thought they were just giving a little girl a second chance at life. Zoe was a 5-year-old mute girl, lost in her own world of silence, and even the social workers had no clue about her past or where she had come from. But what they didn't know was that hidden behind her quiet eyes was a heartbreaking truth waiting to be revealed. And when Zoe finally spoke her first trembling words, it wasn't just Sarah and Mark who were left stunned. It was the beginning of a journey that would shake their lives to the core. As the secrets of Zoe's past begin to unravel, Sarah and Mark find themselves fighting for justice and the truth in ways they never imagined. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're as moved by this emotional journey as we are, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Sarah stared at the pregnancy test, her heart sinking as she saw the single line appear. Another negative result. She sighed, her shoulders slumping as she exited the bathroom. Mark was waiting in the living room, his eyes hopeful. When he saw her face, he knew. No luck this time either. Huh, he said softly, opening his arms. Sarah shook her head and fell into his embrace. I don't understand, Mark. We've been trying for so long. What are we doing wrong? Mark stroked her hair gently. We're not doing anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes these things just take time, but it had been 3 years. 3 years of hoping, praying, and trying everything they could think of. Fertility treatments, special diets, even alternative medicine. Nothing seemed to work. Their home, once filled with dreams of tiny footsteps and children's laughter, now felt emptier than ever. Maybe it's not meant to be, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. Mark pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. Hey, don't say that. We'll have our family, Sarah, one way or another. As they sat on the couch, holding each other close, Mark's mind wandered to a conversation they'd had months ago. You know, he said carefully, we could always consider adoption. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but thoughtful. Do you really think we're ready for that? Mark nodded. I think we have so much love to give, and there are so many children out there who need a home, a family. The idea took root, growing stronger with each passing day. They researched adoption agencies, spoke to friends who had adopted, and slowly, their hope began to rebuild. Weeks later, they found themselves walking into Sunnyside Orphanage, a modest building with cheerful yellow walls and a playground visible from the parking lot. Sarah squeezed Mark's hand as they entered, both nervous and excited. Ms. Thompson, the social worker, greeted them with a warm smile. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Shall we start the tour? As they walked through the corridors, children's laughter echoed around them. They passed playrooms filled with energetic kids, some waving shyly at the newcomers. Sarah's heart swelled with each smiling face, imagining what it would be like to call one of these children their own. And this is our quieter room, Ms. Thompson said, leading them into a space with soft lighting and muted colors. Some of our children prefer a calmer environment. That's when they saw her. In the corner, a small figure sat alone, her dark curls framing a face that seemed too serious for her young years. She was coloring, her movements slow and deliberate, not looking up as they entered. Who's that? Sarah asked, unable to take her eyes off the little girl. Miss Thompson's voice softened. That's Zoe. She's 5 years old. As if sensing their gaze, Zoe looked up. Her large brown eyes met Sarah's, and in that moment, something shifted in the universe. Sarah felt it deep in her bones, a connection inexplicable yet undeniable. Can we meet her? Mark asked, sensing his wife's sudden change in demeanor. Ms. Thompson hesitated. Of course, but I should tell you, Zoe is a special case. She's mute, and we don't know much about her background. As they approached, Zoe's gaze never wavered. She didn't smile or show any reaction, but her eyes followed their every move. Hi, Zoe, Sarah said gently, kneeling down to the girl's level. I'm Sarah, and this is Mark. What are you drawing? Zoe looked at her drawing, a house with a big sun above it. Then back at Sarah. She made no move to respond. Zoe doesn't speak, Miss Thompson explained. She hasn't said a word since she arrived here. Mark knelt down next to Sarah. That's a beautiful house, Zoe. Is that where you'd like to live someday? Zoe's eyes flickered between them, her expression unreadable. Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. This little girl, so quiet and alone, stirred something deep within her. As they stood to continue the tour, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were leaving a piece of themselves behind. She glanced back at Zoe, who had returned to her coloring, her little world seemingly undisturbed by their brief encounter. In Ms. Thompson's office, they learned more about Zoe's mysterious past. She was found wandering alone in the city center about 6 months ago, Ms. Thompson explained, her voice heavy with concern. No identification, no clue as to where she came from. We've exhausted every avenue trying to find her family or any information about her past. Sarah's heart ached at the thought of this little girl, lost and alone in a big city. And she hasn't spoken at all since then? Ms. Thompson shook her head. Not a word. Our child psychologist believes it's a response to trauma, but without knowing what happened to her, it's hard to say for certain. Mark leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Has anyone adopted her? Or shown interest? We've had a few inquiries, Ms. Thompson admitted, but most families are looking for, well, for a child without Zoe's challenges. It takes a special kind of family to take on a child with her needs. Sarah and Mark exchanged a look. In that silent communication, years of shared dreams and disappointments passed between them. Sarah saw in Mark's eyes the same feeling that was growing in her heart, a deep, inexplicable pull towards this quiet little girl. We'd like to adopt Zoe, Sarah said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. Ms. Thompson looked surprised. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a big decision. Adopting any child is a challenge, but Zoe's case is particularly complex. Are you sure you don't want to think about it? Maybe meet some of the other children? Mark reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it gently. We understand it won't be easy, he said, but we've been waiting for our child for so long. When we saw Zoe, it just felt right. Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. We know there will be challenges, but we're ready for them. We want to give Zoe the love and family she deserves. Ms. Thompson studied them for a long moment, then smiled softly. Well, if you're sure, we can start the process. But I must warn you, it won't be quick or easy. There will be home visits, background checks, interviews. We'll do whatever it takes, Sarah said firmly. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews, and preparations. Sarah and Mark threw themselves into learning everything they could about raising a child with selective mutism and potential trauma. They child-proofed their home, set up a beautiful room for Zoe, and even started learning basic sign language. Finally, the day arrived. Sarah and Mark stood in Zoe's new room, making last-minute adjustments. The walls were a soft lavender, decorated with butterflies and stars. A bookshelf stood filled with colorful storybooks, and a cozy reading nook was set up in the corner with plush pillows and a small table lamp. Do you think she'll like it? Sarah asked nervously, smoothing out a wrinkle in the bedspread for the 100th time. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She'll love it, honey. It's perfect. The doorbell rang, and Sarah's heart leapt into her throat. They're here, she whispered. They rushed downstairs, pausing at the front door to take a deep breath. Mark squeezed Sarah's hand. Ready? Sarah nodded, and Mark opened the door. There stood Ms. Thompson, and next to her, holding a small suitcase, was Zoe. Welcome home, Zoe, Sarah said softly, kneeling down to the little girl's eye level. Zoe's eyes were wide as she took in her new surroundings. Her gaze flitted from Sarah to Mark, then to the house behind them. She clutched her suitcase tighter, but made no move to enter. It's okay, sweetheart, Mark said gently. This is your home now. Would you like to see your new room? Zoe looked up at Ms. Thompson, who nodded encouragingly. Go on, Zoe. Sarah and Mark have a beautiful room waiting for you. Slowly, Zoe took a step forward, then another. Sarah resisted the urge to scoop her up in a hug, remembering what they'd learned about respecting Zoe's boundaries and letting her set the pace. As they showed Zoe around the house, Sarah and Mark watched her closely for any reaction. Her face remained largely expressionless, but her eyes were alert, taking in every detail. When they reached her bedroom, Zoe's eyes widened slightly. She walked over to the bookshelf, running her small fingers along the spines of the books. "Do you like to read, Zoe?" Sarah asked. "We can read together anytime you want." Zoe didn't respond, but she did pull out a book, The Velveteen Rabbit, and hugged it to her chest. "That's a great choice," Mark said warmly. "It's about a toy rabbit that becomes real through the love of a child. Maybe we can read it together later." Zoe clutched the book tighter, but gave a tiny nod. It was the first clear response they'd seen from her, and Sarah felt her heart soar. As Miss Thompson prepared to leave, she pulled Sarah and Mark aside. "Remember," she said quietly, "patience is key. Zoe has been through a lot, and it will take time for her to adjust and trust. Don't push her to speak or expect too much too soon." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears. "We understand. We'll give her all the time and love she needs." After Miss Thompson left, the new family of three stood in the living room, an awkward silence settling over them. Zoe still held the book tightly, her eyes darting between Sarah and Mark. "Are you hungry, Zoe?" Mark asked. "We can make some lunch." Zoe didn't respond, but her stomach gave a small growl. Sarah smiled. "I'll take that as a yes. How about some grilled cheese sandwiches?" As Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, Mark sat on the floor near Zoe, who had settled in a corner of the living room. "You know," he said conversationally, "when I was your age, I loved building forts. Would you like to build one while we wait for lunch?" Zoe looked at him curiously, but didn't move. Mark smiled and started gathering cushions and blankets. "We'll make it nice and cozy, like a little cave where you can feel safe." Slowly, cautiously, Zoe edged closer to watch. By the time Sarah called them for lunch, a small fort stood in the living room corner, and Zoe sat just inside its entrance, still clutching her book, but watching Mark with a hint of interest in her eyes. As they ate lunch, Sarah and Mark chatted quietly, including Zoe in the conversation, even though she didn't respond. They talked about the neighborhood, the nearby park, and all the fun things they could do together. That night, as they tucked Zoe into her new bed, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. Joy at finally having their child home, worry about the challenges ahead, and a deep, fierce love for this quiet little girl who had already claimed their hearts. "Good night, Zoe," she whispered, resisting the urge to kiss her forehead. "We're so happy you're here." As they closed the door, leaving it open just a crack, Mark pulled Sarah into a hug. "We did it," he murmured. "She's home?" Sarah nodded against his chest, tears of happiness and nervousness mingling. "It's just the beginning," she said. "We have a long road ahead." Mark kissed the top of her head. "And we'll walk it together, all three of us." In her new room, Zoe lay awake, her eyes wide in the dim light. She hugged the Velveteen Rabbit book to her chest, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. For the first time in months, a tiny spark of hope flickered in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could feel safe again. As sleep finally claimed her, Zoe's grip on the book loosened, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. Whether from fear or relief, not even she could say. The journey of healing had begun, and though the road ahead would be long and sometimes difficult, love had found its way into Zoe's silent world. It was a beginning, fragile and full of uncertainty, but a beginning nonetheless. The first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains of Zoe's new room. Sarah gently pushed the door open, her heart skipping a beat as she saw Zoe's small form curled up under the covers, still fast asleep. It had been a week since they brought her home, and every morning felt like a new adventure. "Rise and shine, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, moving to open the curtains. "It's a beautiful day outside." Zoe stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then recognition set in. She sat up slowly, hugging her knees to her chest. Sarah smiled warmly. "How about some breakfast? I was thinking we could make pancakes today. Would you like to help?" Zoe didn't respond verbally, but she did climb out of bed and follow Sarah downstairs. In the kitchen, Mark was already setting out ingredients. "Good morning, Zoe," he said cheerfully. "Ready to be our little chef?" They had quickly learned that involving Zoe in activities seemed to help her feel more at ease. As they mixed batter and flipped pancakes, Sarah and Mark kept up a gentle stream of chatter, explaining each step and praising Zoe's efforts. "Look at that perfect flip. Mark exclaimed as Zoe carefully turned a pancake. "You're a natural, kiddo." A ghost of a smile touched Zoe's lips, there and gone so quickly that Sarah almost missed it. But it was progress, and it filled her heart with hope. After breakfast, they settled into what had become their daily routine. Sarah spread out some coloring books and crayons on the living room floor, while Mark set up a puzzle on the coffee table. Zoe hesitated for a moment before sitting down with the coloring books. "Remember, Zoe," Sarah said gently, "this is your home now. You can play with anything you like, whenever you want." As the days passed, Sarah and Mark worked hard to create a safe, comforting environment for Zoe. They established a predictable routine: breakfast together, playtime in the morning, lunch, quiet time in the afternoon for reading or napping, then more activities before dinner and bedtime. Every night, they would read a story to Zoe. The Velveteen Rabbit remained her favorite, and they must have read it a dozen times already. Sarah would sit on the edge of Zoe's bed, with the little girl tucked under the covers, her eyes following the pictures as Sarah read. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real," Sarah read, her voice soft in the dim light of Zoe's room. She glanced down to see Zoe's eyes fixed on the page, a look of intense concentration on her face. It was moments like these when Sarah felt closest to her, when the barrier of silence seemed thinnest. But just as they were beginning to settle into a rhythm, an incident occurred that shook their fragile peace. It was a sunny afternoon, and Sarah had opened the windows to let in the fresh spring air. Zoe was at the coffee table, carefully stacking blocks, while Mark worked on his laptop nearby. Suddenly, a car backfired loudly on their street. The reaction was instantaneous. Zoe's blocks clattered to the floor as she dove under the table, her small body trembling violently. Sarah and Mark exchanged alarmed looks. "Zoe, sweetheart," Sarah said, kneeling down to peer under the table. "It's okay. It was just a car making a loud noise. You're safe here." But Zoe remained curled up, her eyes wide with fear. It took nearly an hour of gentle coaxing before she would come out, and even then, she stayed close to Sarah for the rest of the day, jumping at the slightest sound. That night, after Zoe was asleep, Sarah and Mark sat at the kitchen table, worry etched on their faces. "It's more than just shyness," Mark said quietly. "That level of fear, something really traumatic must have happened to her." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears. "I just wish we knew what it was. How can we help her if we don't know what she's been through?" Mark reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "We'll figure it out. We just need to be patient and keep showing her she's safe here." The next day, Sarah brought out some new art supplies, colorful markers, construction paper, and even some child-safe paints. Zoe's eyes lit up at the sight, and she immediately settled down to draw. At first, her drawings were simple: houses, trees, the sun. But as days passed, a recurring theme began to emerge. Zoe often drew a small figure, which Sarah and Mark assumed represented herself, hiding under what looked like a table. Above the table, dark, looming shapes hovered ominously. "What do you think it means?" Sarah asked Mark one evening, looking at Zoe's latest drawing. Mark frowned, studying the picture. It could be a representation of her fears. Maybe the shapes are what she's afraid of. Sarah traced the outline of the small figure with her finger. "She always draws herself hiding. It's like she's constantly expecting danger." The drawings were both a breakthrough and a source of new worry. On one hand, Zoe was communicating, albeit non-verbally. On the other, the content of her drawings hinted at deep-seated fears that they were struggling to understand. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy too. Mark discovered that Zoe seemed to respond to music. He started playing gentle melodies on the stereo while they did activities together. One afternoon, as a soft piano piece filled the living room, Mark held out his hand to Zoe. "Want to dance?" he asked with a smile. Zoe looked at him uncertainly, but didn't back away. Mark began to sway gently to the music, exaggerating his movements a bit to make Zoe smile. After a few moments, Zoe began to mimic him, her movements small and hesitant at first, but growing more confident as the song continued. Sarah, watching from the doorway, felt her heart swell. It wasn't exactly dancing, but seeing Zoe respond to the music, seeing her let down her guard even a little, felt like a huge step forward. Reading time became another opportunity for silent bonding. Sarah noticed that while Zoe never commented on the stories, her eyes would follow the words on the page, and she would often point to pictures she found interesting. One evening, as Sarah read Where the Wild Things Are, Zoe suddenly pointed to the illustration of Max in his wolf suit. "Do you like that picture, Zoe?" Sarah asked gently. Zoe nodded, her finger tracing the outline of Max's costume. "Max is pretending to be wild and scary," Sarah explained. "But really, he's just a little boy who's feeling angry and misunderstood. Sometimes, when we're scared or upset, we might act wild too. But that doesn't change who we really are inside." Zoe's eyes met Sarah's, and for a moment, Sarah felt like she could see straight into the little girl's soul. There was so much hidden there: fear, confusion, longing. Sarah wanted nothing more than to sweep Zoe into her arms and promise that everything would be okay. But she knew that trust had to be earned slowly, especially with a child who had been through so much. As weeks turned into months, Sarah and Mark found themselves on an emotional roller coaster. There were moments of progress that filled them with hope. Zoe willingly holding their hands while crossing the street, or the day she fell and skinned her knee and allowed Sarah to comfort her. But there were also setbacks. Nightmares that left Zoe shaking and unreachable. Days when she refused to leave her room. Times when a sudden movement or loud noise would send her into a panic. One night, after a particularly difficult day where Zoe had barely acknowledged them, Sarah broke down in tears as she and Mark got ready for bed. "What if we can't help her?" she sobbed into Mark's shoulder. "What if she never learns to trust us, to feel safe?" Mark held her close, his own eyes moist. "We can't give up, Sarah. Zoe needs us, even if she can't show it yet. We have to believe that love will win out in the end." Sarah wiped her eyes, nodding. "You're right. I wish I knew what was going on in her head. I wish I could take away whatever's hurting her." "I know," Mark said softly, "but we're making progress, even if it doesn't always feel like it. Remember how she wouldn't even look at us when we first brought her home? Now she seeks us out when she's scared. That's huge." They stood in silence for a moment, drawing strength from each other. Then Sarah straightened up, a determined look in her eyes. "Okay, tomorrow's a new day. We'll keep trying, keep showing her she's loved and safe." Mark smiled, kissing her forehead. "That's my girl. We're in this together, all three of us." As they settled into bed, Sarah's mind wandered to the drawing Zoe had made that day. Another picture of a small figure under a table. But this time, there were two larger figures nearby, their hands outstretched towards the hiding child. Maybe, Sarah thought as she drifted off to sleep, maybe she's starting to see us as protectors, not threats. Maybe we're finally breaking through. In her room down the hall, Zoe lay awake, clutching her stuffed rabbit, a gift from Sarah and Mark. The house was quiet, but in her mind, echoes of the past still rumbled. She closed her eyes tight, trying to focus on the good things. The smell of pancakes in the morning, the sound of Mark's gentle music, the warmth of Sarah's voice as she read bedtime stories. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Zoe's grip on the stuffed animal loosened. Her breathing deepened, and as she finally drifted off to sleep, a tiny part of her dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where the monsters couldn't reach her. Sarah and Mark sat nervously in Dr. Amelia Chen's office, their hands clasped tightly together. The child psychologist had been seeing Zoe for a few weeks now, and today was their first consultation to discuss her observations. Dr. Chen smiled warmly at them. "First, I want to commend you both on the loving environment you've created for Zoe. It's clear she feels safe with you, even if she's not able to express it verbally yet." Sarah leaned forward anxiously. "But why isn't she speaking, Dr. Chen? It's been months now." The psychologist's expression turned serious. "Based on my sessions with Zoe and the information you've provided, I believe her silence is a response to a significant traumatic experience." Mark's grip on Sarah's hand tightened. "What kind of trauma are we talking about?" Dr. Chen shook her head. "Unfortunately, without Zoe being able to tell us, we can't know for certain. But her reactions to loud noises, her tendency to hide, and her selective mutism all point to a deeply frightening event in her past. Sarah felt tears welling up. "How can we help her?" "Patience is key," Dr. Chen said gently. "Zoe needs to feel completely safe before she'll be ready to confront whatever happened to her. Continue doing what you're doing, providing a stable, loving environment. But also, pay close attention to her nonverbal cues. Zoe is communicating, just not with words." As they left the office, Sarah and Mark felt a mix of worry and determination. "We can do this," Mark said, pulling Sarah close. "We'll help Zoe heal, no matter how long it takes." A few weeks later, they decided to take Zoe to a local community fair. It was a risk. Crowds and noise could be overwhelming for her, but they hoped the cheerful atmosphere might bring her out of her shell a bit. As they entered the fairground, the cacophony of sounds and the press of bodies seemed to overwhelm Zoe. Her eyes went wide, darting around nervously. Suddenly, she reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand, holding on tightly. Sarah looked down in surprise, then up at Mark, her eyes shining. It was the first time Zoe had initiated physical contact like this. Mark smiled back, his heart swelling with hope. They made their way through the fair, Zoe's grip on Sarah's hand never loosening. She seemed to relax a bit as they played some games and looked at the colorful displays. For a moment, it felt almost normal, like any family enjoying a day out. But their bubble of happiness was abruptly shattered. As they passed a balloon artist, one of his creations suddenly popped with a loud bang. Zoe's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She tore her hand from Sarah's and dove under a nearby picnic table, curling into a tight ball, her body shaking violently. Sarah and Mark stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the intensity of her fear. Then they sprang into action. Sarah knelt down by the table, speaking softly. "Zoe, sweetheart, it's okay. It was just a balloon. You're safe, I promise." Mark crouched on the other side, his voice gentle but firm. "Remember our special sign, Zoe? You're safe with us." Slowly, Zoe's trembling subsided. She uncurled slightly, peeking out at them. Sarah and Mark both made the heart sign with their hands, smiling encouragingly. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Zoe crawled out from under the table. To their surprise, she didn't just come to them. She threw herself into Sarah's arms, burying her face in her shoulder. Sarah held her close, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, baby. We got you. You're safe." They left the fair immediately, but despite the traumatic moment, they felt a glimmer of hope. Zoe had reached out to them for comfort. It was a small step, but a significant one. Over the next few weeks, they noticed more changes in Zoe's behavior. She began to lean into their hugs instead of just tolerating them. When Mark would ruffle her hair affectionately, she'd look up at him with a small smile instead of flinching away. One evening, as they sat on the couch reading a story, Zoe surprised them by curling up against Sarah's side, her small hand resting on Sarah's arm. Sarah continued reading, her voice thick with emotion, while Mark watched from his armchair, his eyes misty. Zoe still didn't speak, but she started using more gestures to communicate. She'd point to things she wanted, nod, or shake her head in response to questions. It wasn't speech, but it was communication, and it felt like a breakthrough. Then came the day that would be etched in their memories forever. Mark was in the backyard, playfully chasing a butterfly and making exaggerated stumbling motions. Zoe watched from the patio, her eyes following his antics. Suddenly, as Mark tripped over his own feet and fell dramatically onto the grass, a sound filled the air that made both Sarah and Mark freeze in disbelief. It was small, shy, and over almost as soon as it began, but there was no mistaking it. Zoe had giggled. Mark sat up, his eyes wide, looking at Sarah, who stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth. Zoe seemed almost as surprised as they were, her hand flying to her mouth as if to catch the sound and put it back. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mark grinned widely and began his silly dance again, hoping to coax another laugh from Zoe. It didn't come, but the tension had broken. Zoe's eyes sparkled with an emotion they'd never seen before: joy. That night, after Zoe was asleep, Sarah and Mark sat on the porch, reliving the moment. She laughed, Mark, Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. Our girl laughed. Mark squeezed her hand. I know. It's incredible. Maybe this is the turning point we've been hoping for. But even as they celebrated this milestone, new worries were on the horizon. Zoe's drawings, which had been a source of both communication and concern, began to take on a darker tone. The cheerful houses and sunny skies were replaced by shadowy figures looming over a small, huddled shape. The recurring image of a child under a table became more detailed, more vivid. The dark shapes above seemed more menacing, with what looked like outstretched hands reaching for the hiding child. Sarah and Mark exchanged worried glances as they looked at Zoe's latest drawing. The intensity of the images was unsettling, the emotions they conveyed all too clear. Zoe, honey, Sarah said gently, kneeling beside her. Can you tell us about this drawing? Zoe looked at the paper, then back at Sarah. Her small finger pointed to the figure under the table. Is that you? Mark asked softly. Zoe nodded, then pointed to the dark shapes above. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Are they what you're afraid of, sweetheart? Zoe didn't respond, but her hand trembled slightly as she lowered it. Mark knelt down too, his voice calm despite the worry in his eyes. Zoe, you know you're safe here with us, right? Nothing bad is going to happen to you. Zoe looked at them both, her eyes wide and filled with an emotion they couldn't quite decipher. Then slowly she nodded. The next day, while Zoe was at her therapy session with Dr. Chun, Sarah took the drawings to an art therapist recommended by their pediatrician. Dr. Lydia Ramos studied the images carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. These drawings are incredibly revealing, she said finally, looking up at Sarah. The repetition of the hiding child, the looming figures, these aren't just products of imagination. They're memories. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. Whenever she gets scared, we find her hiding under the table, just like in the drawings. Dr. Ramos leaned forward, her expression serious. Mrs. Anderson, based on these images and what you've told me, I believe Zoe may have witnessed a violent event, possibly involving people she knew. The table represents her safe space, the only place she felt protected. Sarah felt her heart drop. Oh God, she whispered. What do we do? Continue to provide her with a safe, loving environment, Dr. Ramos advised. But I also think it might be time to involve the authorities again. If Zoe witnessed a crime, there might be an unsolved case out there that could provide more information about her background. As Sarah left Dr. Ramos's office, her mind was whirling. She called Mark immediately, and they agreed to meet at home to discuss their next steps. That evening, after Zoe was asleep, Sarah and Mark sat at the kitchen table, the drawings spread out before them. We need to know what happened to her, Mark said, his voice filled with determination. Not just for Zoe's sake, but what if there's an ongoing investigation? What if someone's looking for her? Sarah nodded, her expression equally resolute. I'll call Detective Ramirez tomorrow. She was the one who handled Zoe's case when she was first found. Maybe with this new information, they can reopen the investigation. As they gathered up the drawings, a silent, understanding passed between them. Whatever they uncovered, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face it together. For Zoe, for the little girl who had stolen their hearts, they would move heaven and earth to uncover the truth and help her heal. Little did they know, their determination to help Zoe was about to set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. The truth, when it finally came to light, would be more shocking and heartbreaking than they could have ever imagined. But for now, they clung to hope. Hope that with love, patience, and perseverance, they could help Zoe overcome her traumatic past and find her voice again. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the sky and thunder rumbling ominously. Inside, Zoe's eyes were wide with fear, her small body trembling as she huddled in the corner of the living room. Sarah and Mark exchanged worried glances, knowing that storms had always been particularly difficult for their adopted daughter. It's okay, sweetheart, Sarah said softly, approaching Zoe with open arms. It's just a storm. We're safe here. But as another crash of thunder shook the house, Zoe bolted. Sarah and Mark watched in helpless concern as she dove under the dining room table, curling into a tight ball. Mark knelt down, his voice gentle. "Zoe, honey, remember our safe sign? You're okay. We're here to protect you." They waited, hearts heavy, as Zoe remained frozen under the table. Then, barely audible above the storm, they heard it, a whisper so faint they almost missed it. "Mommy, hide!" Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark looked at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Had they really heard what they thought they heard? "Zoe," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Sweetie, did you say something?" Zoe's eyes, filled with terror, met Sarah's. Her lips moved again, the words slightly louder this time. "Mommy said hide. Bad men coming." Sarah and Mark felt their world tilt on its axis. After months of silence, Zoe was speaking, but the context of her words sent chills down their spines. "It's okay, Zoe," Mark said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Can you tell us more about what happened? We're here to listen." Zoe's words came haltingly, punctuated by sobs and long pauses. Loud noises. "Mommy's scared. She put me under the table. Said be quiet." Sarah crawled under the table, sitting close to Zoe but not touching her, giving her space. "You're so brave, Zoe. Can you tell us what happened next?" Zoe's small body shook as she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bad men came in, yelling. Daddy tried to stop them. There was a loud bang." Mark felt his heart breaking as he watched Zoe relive her trauma. He wanted nothing more than to sweep her into his arms and shield her from the pain, but he knew she needed to get this out. "Mommy screamed," Zoe went on, her words coming faster now, tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "She ran to Daddy. Another loud bang. Mommy fell down. Red everywhere." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears any longer. "Oh, Zoe," she choked out. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. You must have been so scared." Zoe nodded, her eyes distant as if she was seeing it all happen again. "I stayed quiet like Mommy said. The bad men took things. Then they left. I called for Mommy and Daddy, but they didn't answer." Mark's fists clenched at his sides, a mixture of sorrow and rage coursing through him. How could anyone do this to a family, leaving a little girl to witness such horror? "You did everything right, Zoe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were so brave, staying quiet like your mommy told you to." Zoe looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I couldn't help them. I was scared." Sarah reached out slowly, and when Zoe didn't flinch away, she gently took her hand. "It wasn't your fault, sweetheart. None of it was your fault. You did exactly what your mommy wanted you to do to stay safe." As Zoe's story sank in, Sarah and Mark felt a whirlwind of emotions. Heartbreak for what Zoe had endured, relief that she was finally able to speak about it, and a fierce determination to bring those responsible to justice. "Zoe," Mark said softly, "you're safe now. Sarah and I will do everything we can to protect you and to make sure the bad men can't hurt anyone else. Is it okay if we tell the police what you told us? They might be able to find the people who hurt your parents." Zoe hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Will it bring Mommy and Daddy back?" Sarah felt her heart shatter all over again. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'm so sorry, but it won't bring them back. But it might help stop the bad men from hurting other families." As Zoe processed this, her small body still trembling, Sarah and Mark shared a look of silent communication. They knew their lives had just changed irrevocably. The journey ahead would be challenging, but they were more committed than ever to helping Zoe heal and finding justice for her parents. The next morning, after a night filled with nightmares and tears, Sarah made the call they'd been dreading. Detective Ramirez listened intently as Sarah recounted Zoe's story, her voice professional but tinged with sympathy. "We'll reopen the case immediately," Detective Ramirez assured them. "Can you bring Zoe in to give a formal statement? I know it will be difficult for her, but her testimony could be crucial in solving this case." Mark's protective instincts flared. "Is there any way to do this without putting Zoe through more trauma?" Detective Ramirez's voice softened. "I understand your concern, Mr. Anderson. We'll do everything we can to make it as easy on Zoe as possible. We have specialists trained to work with child witnesses. As they prepared to take Zoe to the police station, Sarah and Mark felt a mix of determination and anxiety. How would Zoe react to being questioned by strangers? Would reliving the trauma set back the progress she'd made? At the station, they were met by Detective Ramirez and a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as Dr. Lisa Chun, a child psychologist specializing in trauma. "Hi, Zoe," Dr. Chun said warmly, kneeling down to Zoe's level. "I heard you're a very brave girl who has an important story to tell. Would you like to come with me and talk about it? Your mom and dad can come too if you'd like." Zoe looked up at Sarah and Mark, who nodded encouragingly. "We'll be right there with you, sweetheart," Sarah assured her. In a cozy room filled with toys and comfortable furniture, Zoe slowly began to recount her story again. Dr. Chin gently guided her with questions, using dolls and a dollhouse to help Zoe demonstrate what had happened. As Zoe spoke, Detective Ramirez took notes, her face grave. When Zoe described the intruders, the detective's eyebrows raised slightly. "Zoe," she said gently, "can you tell me more about what the bad men looked like? Do you remember anything special about them?" Zoe nodded, her small hand clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. One had a star on his neck, like a drawing, and another had a funny walk, like his leg was hurt. Detective Ramirez exchanged a significant look with her partner. "Thank you, Zoe," she said. "You've been incredibly brave and helpful." After the interview, while Zoe was coloring with Dr. Chun, Detective Ramirez pulled Sarah and Mark aside. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The details Zoe provided match a string of home invasions we've been investigating. The tattoo and the limp. These could be the breaks we've been waiting for." Mark's jaw clenched. "You mean these monsters have done this to other families?" Detective Ramirez nodded grimly. "We believe so, but thanks to Zoe's testimony, we might finally have enough to track them down." As they left the police station, Sarah and Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had promised Zoe they would do everything in their power to find justice for her parents, and they intended to keep that promise. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The police, armed with Zoe's testimony and the connection to other cases, pursued leads with renewed vigor. Sarah and Mark found themselves juggling their roles as Zoe's protectors and nurturers with their determination to see the case solved. One evening, as they tucked Zoe into bed, she looked up at them with wide, serious eyes. "Are you my new mommy and daddy now?" Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with love. "We are if you want us to be, sweetheart," Sarah said softly. "We love you very much." Zoe was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "I love you too," she whispered. "But I still miss my first mommy and daddy." Mark stroked her hair gently. "That's okay, Zoe. You can love us and still miss them. They'll always be a part of you." As Zoe drifted off to sleep, Sarah and Mark stood in the doorway, watching her. "We have to see this through," Mark said quietly. "For Zoe, and for her parents." Sarah nodded, determination etched on her face. "We will, no matter what it takes." The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Detective Ramirez called, her voice tight with excitement. "We've got them," she said. A pawn shop owner recognized one of the stolen items from Zoe's parents' house. "When we investigated, we found a treasure trove of evidence linking this group to multiple home invasions, including Zoe's case." Sarah sagged against the wall, relief washing over her. "Are you sure it's them?" "Positive," Detective Ramirez confirmed. "The tattoo, the limp, it all matches. We're moving in to make the arrests now." As they watched the news that evening, seeing the suspects led away in handcuffs, Sarah and Mark felt a complex mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, but also a renewed sadness for what Zoe had lost. "Should we tell her?" Mark asked, his voice low. Sarah nodded slowly. "I think we have to. She needs to know that the bad men can't hurt anyone else now." They found Zoe in her room, coloring one of her now familiar pictures. But this time, something was different. Instead of the dark, looming figures, there were 3 smiling stick figures. One small, 2 large, holding hands. "Zoe, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, kneeling beside her. "We have some news to share with you." As they explained in simple terms that the police had found the men who hurt her parents, Zoe listened silently, her eyes wide. Are they going away forever? She asked finally. Mark nodded. Yes, honey. They're going to a place where they can't hurt anyone else ever again. Zoe was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at them. Can we visit Mommy and Daddy? To tell them. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Of course we can, sweetie. We can go to the cemetery whenever you want. The next day, they stood hand in hand before two simple gravestones. Zoe placed a small bouquet of flowers between them. Hi, Mommy and Daddy, she said softly. The police found the bad men. They can't hurt anyone anymore. She paused, then added, I have a new Mommy and Daddy now. But I still love you. As they walked back to the car, Zoe between them, holding both their hands, Sarah and Mark knew that their journey was far from over. Zoe would need ongoing support and therapy to process her trauma and grief. But they also knew that together, as a family, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. That night, as they tucked Zoe into bed, she hugged them both tightly. Thank you, she whispered. For what, sweetheart? Sarah asked. Zoe's voice was small but clear. For finding me, for keeping me safe, for helping catch the bad men. Mark kissed her forehead gently. We'll always keep you safe, Zoe. Always. As they closed her door, leaving it open just to crack the way she liked it, Sarah and Mark stood in the hallway, holding each other close. We did it, Sarah said softly. We kept our promise to her. Mark nodded, his eyes misty. And we'll keep on doing it every day. For Zoe, and for the family we've become. In the quiet of the night, as Zoe slept peacefully for the first time in months, Sarah and Mark knew that while the road ahead might not always be easy, they were ready to face it together. They had fought for justice, yes, but more importantly, they had given a little girl back her voice, her safety, and her chance at a happy future. And in doing so, they had found the family they had always dreamed of, one built on love, strength, and the unbreakable bonds forged through adversity. As they looked toward the future, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together, with Zoe at the center of their world. The months that followed brought a new rhythm to the Anderson household. With the perpetrators behind bars and justice served, Zoe began to truly settle into her new life. Her nightmares, while not completely gone, became less frequent. The sound of her laughter, once so rare, now filled the house more often. Sarah and Mark watched in wonder as Zoe blossomed. Her words, tentative at first, came more freely with each passing day. She began to express her needs and wants, to share her thoughts and fears. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing a flood of emotions and experiences that had been bottled up for so long. One sunny Saturday morning, as they sat around the breakfast table, Zoe looked up from her cereal with a serious expression. Can I go to school? She asked, her voice small but determined. Sarah and Mark exchanged surprised glances. They had discussed the possibility of school, but had been hesitant to push Zoe before she was ready. Are you sure you feel ready for that, sweetheart? Sarah asked gently. Zoe nodded, her chin set in a way that reminded Mark so much of her biological mother from the photos they'd seen. I want to learn, she said, and maybe make friends? The hope in her voice brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Of course you can go to school, Zoe. We'll find the perfect place for you. The search for the right school became their new mission. They visited several, looking for one that would provide the support and understanding Zoe needed. Finally, they found Sunnyside Elementary, a small private school known for its nurturing environment and experience with children who had faced trauma. The day before Zoe was set to start school, Sarah found her in her room, meticulously arranging her new backpack. A mix of excitement and anxiety radiated from the little girl. You okay, sweetheart? Sarah asked, sitting on the edge of Zoe's bed. Zoe nodded, then hesitated. What if the other kids don't like me? Sarah's heart clenched. Oh, honey, she said, pulling Zoe into a gentle hug. The other kids are going to love you. You're kind, smart, and brave. Just be yourself, and you'll make friends in no time. Zoe leaned into the embrace, drawing comfort from Sarah's words. Will you and Daddy be there to pick me up? We wouldn't miss it for the world, Sarah assured her. The next morning was a flurry of activity. Mark made Zoe's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, while Sarah helped her get dressed in her new school clothes. As they drove to Sunnyside, Zoe sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her backpack. At the school gates, they were met by Ms. Thompson, Zoe's new teacher. She knelt down to Zoe's level, her smile warm and welcoming. "Hello, Zoe," she said. "We're so excited to have you join us. Would you like to come and meet your new classmates?" Zoe looked up at Sarah and Mark, her eyes wide. They both nodded encouragingly. "You've got this, kiddo," Mark said, giving her a thumbs up. With a deep breath, Zoe took Ms. Thompson's outstretched hand. She took a few steps, then turned back to wave at Sarah and Mark. "See you after school," she said, her voice stronger than they expected. As they watched Zoe disappear into the school building, Sarah leaned against Mark, tears in her eyes. "She's so brave," she whispered. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "She is," he agreed. "And she's going to be just fine." The day seemed to crawl by as Sarah and Mark anxiously awaited the end of the school day. When they finally pulled up to the pickup area, they scanned the crowd of children for Zoe's familiar face. Suddenly, they spotted her, walking out of the building hand in hand with a little girl with pigtails. Zoe's face lit up when she saw them, and she waved excitedly. "Mommy, Daddy," she called out as she ran towards them. "This is my new friend, Emma." Sarah and Mark exchanged delighted glances. It was the first time Zoe had called them Mommy and Daddy without hesitation. As they drove home, Zoe chattered excitedly about her day, the books they'd read, the art project they'd done, and most of all, her new friend Emma. Sarah and Mark listened, their hearts full of joy at seeing Zoe so animated and happy. That night, as they tucked Zoe into bed, she hugged them both tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what, sweetheart?" Mark asked. Zoe's eyes were serious as she looked at them. "For giving me a new family. For helping me be brave." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, Zoe," she said softly. "You've always been brave. We're just here to remind you of that." As the weeks passed, Zoe continued to thrive at school. Her friendship with Emma grew, and soon playdates and sleepovers became part of their routine. Watching Zoe giggle and play with her new friend, Sarah and Mark marveled at how far she had come. But healing is rarely a linear process, and there were still challenges to face. One night, a particularly vivid nightmare left Zoe shaken and withdrawn. The next morning, she refused to go to school, clinging to Sarah and bursting into tears at the mention of leaving the house. Sarah and Mark knew they needed to tread carefully. They called the school to let them know Zoe wouldn't be coming in, then focused on helping her feel safe and secure. "How about we build a special for today?" Mark suggested. "A safe place just for you?" Zoe nodded hesitantly, and soon the living room was transformed into a cozy fortress of blankets and pillows. Sarah brought in Zoe's favorite books and stuffed animals, creating a haven of comfort. As they sat together in the fort, reading stories and talking softly, Zoe gradually began to relax. "I'm sorry," she whispered at one point, her eyes downcast. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart," Sarah assured her. "Everyone has bad days sometimes. We're here for you no matter what." That evening, as Zoe slept peacefully, Sarah and Mark sat on the porch processing the day's events. "Maybe we should schedule an extra session with Dr. Chun," Mark suggested, referring to the child psychologist who had been working with Zoe. Sarah nodded. "I think that's a good idea. We need to make sure we're giving Zoe all the support she needs." The next day, Zoe was ready to return to school, her resilience shining through once again. As they dropped her off, Miss Thompson pulled them aside. "I heard about yesterday," she said softly. "I want you to know that we're here to support Zoe in any way we can. We can set up a quiet space for her in the classroom if she ever needs a moment to herself." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means so much to know that you understand." As the months turned into a year, and then two, Zoe's progress continued to amaze them. She excelled in school, developed close friendships, and slowly but surely, the shadows of her past began to recede. On the second anniversary of Zoe's adoption, they decided to have a small celebration. Emma and her parents came over, along with a few other close friends who had supported them throughout their journey. As they gathered around the backyard, enjoying cake and laughter, Sarah found herself overwhelmed with emotion. She slipped inside for a moment, needing a quiet second to compose herself. She was standing in the kitchen, wiping her eyes, when she felt a small hand slip into hers. Looking down, she saw Zoe gazing up at her, concern etched on her little face. "Are you okay, Mommy?" Zoe asked. Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to Zoe's level. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm just so happy and proud of you." Zoe tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "I'm happy too," she said. "And I'm proud of us. We're a good family, aren't we?" Sarah felt her heart swell with love. "The best family," she agreed, pulling Zoe into a tight hug. As they rejoined the party, Sarah caught Mark's eye across the yard. He raised an eyebrow in question, and she nodded, letting him know everything was fine. More than fine, really. It was perfect. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Zoe was tucked in a bed, Sarah and Mark sat on the porch swing, enjoying the quiet evening. "I've been thinking," Mark said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe it's time we considered expanding our family." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "You mean?" Mark nodded. "Adoption. I know it's a big decision, but seeing how well Zoe has thrived with us, I can't help but think there might be another child out there who needs a home." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. The idea both excited and terrified her. "What about Zoe?" she asked finally. "How do you think she'd feel about a sibling?" "I think she'd love it," Mark said. "She's got so much love to give. But we need to talk to her about it, of course. Make sure she's ready." Sarah leaned against him, her mind whirling with possibilities. "Let's sleep on it," she said. "But I think I like the idea." The next morning, they decided to broach the subject with Zoe. They found her in the backyard, swinging on the tire swing Mark had hung from the old oak tree. "Zoe, sweetheart," Sarah called. "Can we talk to you for a minute?" Zoe hopped off the swing and came over, her face curious. "Am I in trouble?" Mark chuckled. "Not at all, kiddo. We just want to ask you something important." They sat down on the grass, Zoe between them. Sarah took a deep breath, then began. "Zoe, how would you feel about having a little brother or sister?" Zoe's eyes widened. "Are you having a baby?" "No, honey," Mark explained. "We're thinking about adopting another child like we adopted you. A child who needs a family, just like you did." Zoe was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Sarah and Mark exchanged nervous glances over her head. Finally, Zoe looked up at them. "Would they be scared and sad, like I was?" Sarah felt her heart constrict. "They might be, sweetheart. But if we do this, we'll love them and help them feel safe, just like we did with you." Zoe nodded solemnly. "Then I think we should do it," she said. "I can help them not be scared. I can be their big sister and protect them." Mark pulled Zoe into a tight hug. "You are amazing, you know that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. As they began the adoption process again, they made sure to involve Zoe every step of the way. She helped them prepare the spare room, picking out cheerful curtains and soft blankets. She even drew pictures to hang on the walls, to make the new baby feel welcome, she explained. Months passed, filled with home studies, paperwork, and anxious waiting. Finally, they got the call they had been hoping for. A baby boy, just 3 months old, needed a home. His mother, a teenager, had made the difficult decision to place him for adoption. As they drove to the adoption agency, Zoe clutched a stuffed elephant she had picked out as a gift for her new brother. "Do you think he'll like it?" she asked anxiously. "I'm sure he'll love it," Sarah assured her, her own stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. When they walked into the room and saw the tiny bundle in the social worker's arms, Sarah felt the world shift on its axis. The baby boy had a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. "Would you like to hold your son?" the social worker asked, smiling at Sarah and Mark. As Sarah cradled the baby in her arms, she felt a sense of rightness wash over her. This was meant to be. She looked up at Mark, seeing the same emotion reflected in his eyes. "Zoe," Mark said softly, "would you like to meet your little brother?" Zoe approached cautiously, her eyes wide with wonder. Sarah knelt down so Zoe could see the baby's face. "Hi, baby brother," Zoe whispered. "I'm your big sister." I brought you a friend. She held out the stuffed elephant, gently tucking it next to the baby in Sarah's arms. As they drove home, their family now expanded by one tiny but significant member, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. Zoe sat in the back seat, alternating between peering at her new brother in his car seat and peppering them with questions. "What's his name?" Zoe asked. "Can I help feed him? Will he sleep in my room?" Sarah and Mark laughed, their hearts full of joy. "His name is Ethan," Mark said. "And yes, you can help take care of him. But he'll have his own room for now." That night, as they tucked Zoe into bed, she hugged them both fiercely. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. Zoe's eyes were bright with happiness. "For making our family bigger. For giving me a little brother to love." As Sarah and Mark stood in the doorway of Zoe's room, watching her drift off to sleep, they felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their journey had been filled with challenges and heartache, but it had led them here, to this moment of perfect contentment. They checked on baby Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his crib, before retiring to their own room. As they lay in bed, Sarah turned to Mark, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Did you ever imagine our lives would turn out like this?" she asked softly. Mark pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "But I wouldn't change a single thing." As they drifted off to sleep, the house quiet except for the soft sounds of their children's breathing, Sarah and Mark knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. They had built a family founded on love, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds forged through both joy and adversity. In Zoe and Ethan's rooms, night lights cast a soft, comforting glow. And in the hallway between, a family portrait hung on the wall. Sarah, Mark, Zoe, and now baby Ethan, their smiles radiant with the joy of belonging. It was a testament to the power of love, the strength of family, and the beautiful unpredictability of life's journey. Sarah and Mark's decision to stand by Zoe and seek justice for her parents didn't just give her a voice. It gave her hope and a chance to heal. Their unwavering love and support helped Zoe reclaim her strength and transform her life in ways they never imagined. It's a powerful reminder that compassion and determination can uncover the truth and create lasting change. What would you have done if you were in Sarah or Mark's place? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more inspiring and emotional journeys like this one.